What's going on, boys? Biff McBuffington here. Do you know what time it is? It is Brendan Schaub Fairy Tales Part 3 o'clock. Ooh, guess we better get started. So there are pretty much an infinite number of things we can do here, but the next two very well might be the two biggest Schaub-isms, and they're sort of conjoined, so I'll do them back to back, but it is the Trugg Walgg, shortly followed by the 300 pages mega incident. So the Trugg Walgg, the inner workings of this one and really the 300 pages thing, there's so many details here and nuances, and there was back and forth and multiple podcasts. So really giving it its true justice. It would take about 2 hours, and funnily enough, somebody actually has a 2-hour-long YouTube video on the whole saga. So if you want like the full breakdown, I would recommend that. But anyway, so the Trugg Walgg, it all started when Annie Letterman on Trash Tuesday, she was talking about a, quote, unfunny comedian who asked her to wog him to his trug, and Annie responded with, "Why? So I can blow you?" And Kalila had a field day with that, and she followed up with like a story of her own about this same mystery unfunny comedian
guy that was like, "Why don't you walk me to my truck?" This married guy, where I'm like, and we know him, I'm not gonna say who it is. He's like,
I know him.
"Why don't you give me a walk? Why don't you you should walk me to my truck?" I'm like, "So what, I can blow you?" Like,
he came for you? Oh, he came for me so hard, and we know his chick. On New Year's Eve, while he was having dinner with his family, he was like, "What are you doing tonight?" I was like, left him on red. He was like, "Well, I hate that I'm with my in-laws right now. Do you want to go?"
The problem, quote unquote, is everybody immediately assumed it was Schaub, and probably correctly so. I think it's one of those deals where no one officially just came out and said she was talking about Schaub, but I think the writing's sort of on the wall there. So whether it's official or not, I mean, come on, it's right there. So anyway, so like Brendan ends up denying it on his podcast. He goes on Flagrant and denies it. Trash Tuesday has like at least one follow-up, again calling this person unfunny. At some point, the initials were mentioned, which are B and S, which makes it even more telling. I mean, how many unfunny comedians are there with the initials BS? Like, last time I checked, Joseph Rogan's initials aren't BS, so it can't be him. And those are the two unfunniest comedians you can find. So yeah, I think there's really only one person left. Now, this goes into the Schaub fairy tale section because we don't know Schaub was lying here, but I mean, you know, given the context clues, I think you can come to a conclusion that makes the most sense. So, okay. All right. So, like, even while this was going on, but like sort of going away, somehow coincidentally, or maybe it was manufactured, but the whole 300 pages Bobby Lee thing came about. And it all started because someone on Brendan's crew, like whether it was his lawyers or someone else, they somehow determined Bobby Lee was part of a like Brendan hate group, which was probably just the Fighter and the Kid subreddit, but apparently there was evidence that it was very malicious and Bobby was behind it. Like they saw like an official Tiger Belly email or something.
You apologize profusely. You say you're embarrassed after realizing we actually never said your name on Trash Tuesday. We come to the agreement that I will not be mentioning or alluding to you in any way moving forward. But I still demand that you send me the 300 pages of evidence against me, Bobby, and my company, because that is...
So anyway, there's this magic 300 pages of evidence, and Schaub tells Callen And that's where the problem really started, I think, because Callen called Bobby and just went absolutely insane on him. And, you know, obviously Bobby, there's like a 99.99999% chance that he had nothing to do with this. So he was just very caught off guard, and he got pretty emotional about it, you know, rightfully so, because from what we were told, this phone call was rather disgusting. So that happened, and then Kalila calls Brendan, and she basically does the same thing to Brendan, which obviously in this case it's more deserved because Brendan is sort of the source of this whole thing, even though he deflected and said it was like his crew, and he wasn't really aware of it, even though that, like, something here just doesn't make any sense at all. So, you know, there's just like a ton of speculation, and eventually, to supposedly clear the air, Brendan goes on Tiger Belly, and it's one of the more amusing podcasts I've seen just because of how painfully awkward it is.
A video of child abuse on the subreddit where they noticed a barrage of comments linked to one IP address, linked to a computer from my home.
Correct.
As they continued to investigate, they were able to retrieve 300 pages of evidence that either Bobby or I were responsible for the 6 years of subreddit harassment towards you, all 6 years to one home address. I said, "But Schaub, we've only lived here for 2.5. How is this possible?"
Like, they really try and get an answer out of Brendan regarding like how this started and why it started, and he doesn't really have an answer. And he does sort of apologize, but again, he consistently falled back on the, well, it was like my team doing this. I wasn't really aware of it until it happened already. But like, these comedians supposedly love each other, right? Like, if they really love each other, why would Brendan have someone on his team concoct 300 pages of evidence that someone you love is part of a hate group against someone they love, and then someone else you love would call this other person who supposedly loves him and berate the person you love because they were supposedly part of this? Like, none of this makes any sense, and it's pretty obvious who the source of all this strife was in this case. So I think it's fair to include it in this compilation series. Okay. Okay, so now we have the Starbucks incident, which is one of the newer ones. And I try not to bring family into these because, you know, I just try and keep them directed towards the people like really putting themselves out there, but it's hard to avoid in this case. Brendan's wife, Joanna, made a video, and she was just going on and on and on about this run-in she had at a Starbucks drive-through. Like, there's a guy in front of her, and I don't even know the details, and it's not even important, but like, he was trying to like back up or something in the line, so Joanna had to like toot her horn, and this guy just got like really rubbed the wrong way, and he was like verbally attacking her. So she calls up Bren, and he flies into the rescue like fucking Batman or something, and he races in his Batmobile and does like a pit maneuver on him. No, there's no like contact between the vehicles from what I remember, but they did like pin him in the middle of an intersection, and Brendan gets out and asks him, "Hey, do you have a gun?" And he's like, "No." And then he's like, "Okay, so are we gonna like fight or something?" And that's the very quick gist of it. Now, it's in this compilation because it's an interesting scenario where the story was told 2 times by 2 different people, and there were conflicting parts in both of the stories. See, if this was like normal people, I would just be like, oh, well, they just got their stories. There was a lot going on. It was like a high stress situation. So they probably just got, a little confused on the details from what happened. But given it's Brendan and things are basically always exaggerated in one way or another, like honestly, at this point, this is a much more recent story, and I think Brendan's discovered that the only way he really gets like view bumps anymore is if he has some big storyline he can talk about. Other examples being the truck flip, the Nate Diaz situation, the time he cried on air. And I think he knows, like, all right, well, the only way I get views anymore is if like something ridiculous happens. So I'm just gonna continue making, like, fabricating situations. So my bet is this happened in some regard, but as to what the actual details are, whole thing's a little suspicious. Like Brendan comes out of this thing looking a little too much like a superstar, even though, he did like accost somebody. All right, so next up, this one I saw references to on the Reddit many times, but I didn't even get it. Like I really had to look at this one to get the meaning behind it.
Certain cities as a comic, it's tough, man. Like I had to reschedule my San Francisco dates this coming weekend because they recalled the district attorney and people aren't going out to clubs and restaurants. No one's coming to the city. So they wanted to push the dates till things are a little safer. So I'll have some updates as far as when we're rescheduling San Francisco, but that's out of my control, man.
But it's the whole Brendan DA recall comedy show cancellation situation. So this was mid-2022, and the San Francisco district attorney was recalled. Now that part actually happened. The other thing that actually happened was Brendan had a comedy show there, and it got canceled. Now, the part that we aren't sure on is how those two are connected because they are apparently connected. According to Brendan, the district attorney got recalled and he had to cancel his comedy show because San Francisco became a unequivocal war zone. So Brendan announces on his podcast that he had to cancel because San Francisco is just so out of control these days. He can't do a show there. And see, I think he was really proud of himself for this one because this is like the perfect like Rogan-esque excuse, because this was like peak Joe Rogan hates California and LA because he was already in Texas at the time. So this just gives the Rogan sphere like a bit more credibility on the whole California bad, Texas good thing. So I think Brendan was very proud of himself for this little shtick that he pulled. Now, unfortunately, it was pretty obvious to most people that this whole thing just seems a little unlikely. that the district attorney recall would somehow, Brendan in particular would have to cancel a comedy show, but nobody else would. So, so again, this is one where we don't unequivocally know he's making something up, but the evidence sure doesn't look very promising. So, okay, what do we have next? Oh, this one this one is my favorite, sort of. Now, it unfortunately involves two people who are rather uncouth, but it's the whole Schaub tells Dana, I can do your job, you can't do mine. Which is like I just have to include this one just because of how, like, this is the kind of thing that makes it so painfully obvious like who Schaub really is as a person. Like if you go out and say to anybody, if you go say to anybody, I can do your job, you can't do mine. That's like the most asshole-ish thing you could really ever say to anybody, because you're really just like you're attempting to completely belittle like what they do for a living, all while making you sound like the biggest badass to ever walk the planet. And again, I know it's Dana White, and he's not the fan favorite, to put it lightly, but like, come on, dude. Like you don't say that about somebody. And I put it in this fairy tale thing because, first of all, I don't think Schaub is capable of doing what Dana has done. And going by recent numbers, I think Dana could run a podcast that gets, 50,000 views an episode. And then to add to this one, this is another one of those deals where Schaub repeatedly states that him and Dana are on good terms, even though I think Schaub is still banned from UFC events. And I don't think it comes up too often, but when Dana does talk about Schaub, it's never positive. So, yeah, I don't know how on good terms they are after Schaub announces to the world, I can do Dana's job, but he can't do mine. So that about wraps up the fairy tale segment. I do want to wrap this up with a couple of updates. This one, there's actually one thing that I need to give Schaub a bit of credit on, and it is he apparently did meet The Rock in an elevator. Now, I think I specifically talked about this one because it fits into a compilation of Schaub runs into people, and this celebrity person he runs into says, hey, you're the ex guy who whys too much. And I think it's still fair to call those fairy tales because, again, I don't see how those happened exactly the way he said they happened in every single scenario. But to give him credit, he did run into The Rock in an elevator. Now, did it happen the way he said it did? Who knows? We'll never know. But either way, it's worth mentioning. Now, the other one, this is one where he might have just misspoke, but this is actually along the same lines because he said he met Sandler in a bathroom, and he said, Sandler said, oh, you're the ex-guy who whys too much again. And recently, very recently, he has said, oh, I never met Sandler, because he was talking about David Spade, and he says he worked with David Spade, and I have no idea if that's accurate or not. We can just assume it is for right this second, but having talked about David Spade, Spade and Sandler are very close, and Sandler comes up in the discussion and Schaub says, oh, I never met Sandler. And it's like, oh, so did you? Because you have this story you've told multiple times about how you ran into him in a bathroom. So which one is it? I guess we'll never know, or Brendan will just come up with another fairy tale to justify the situation here.
Yeah, I thought this one was kind of cool. You don't really see a lot of people that still work together after all these years, but Rob Schneider says that Adam Sandler has literally called him every week for the past
Adam Sandler's so
years.
loyal to his friends. It's
That's
crazy.
what I mean. So
Kevin Nealon
loyal.
was telling me that. He's so loyal.
But that whole crew's cool.
I know.
Like
cool.
David Spade, most talented person I've ever worked with.
Yep.
Hands down, not even close. Like David Spade's dope. I've never met Sandler, but I adore him.
I've done a couple readings.
Rob Schneider's cool.
Sandler,
Yeah.
he's great. But Rob I know really well. Rob I talk to periodically. Rob.
But yeah, so that was a round of mini updates on the fairy tales, and this officially concludes Fairy Tales Part 3. So let me know what you think, and I will talk to you guys next time.